Hello, this video is a response to one of our discussion boards about claims and warrants, but I also want to start talking about our research topics. Um, a lot of our work right now is based in abstract thinking about these topics we will somehow select for our research project. We want to pick something that's big and good and something that you know about. Many of you have already said that you wished you could look at one of the topics from the forbidden list, and I'm sorry about that, but for reasons that'll be explained in this video and in other videos, we'll see why it's probably not a good idea. So the first thing I want to look at is our response to discussion board 3, where we talked about claims and warrants. I think all of you did a great job analyzing commercials and some other things. We did miss our warrant and our authority, though. So that's not really a big deal because those are new things. You get the hang of it. So when it comes to warrants, many of you looked at it from a singular perspective of, well, the company wants this. It wants you to do something. But in reality, the company probably just wants your money. So we have to think about what are the real warrants and what might be the perceived warrants or the warrants they want you to think they are. So we have to start cutting through some BS. There's going to be a lot of BS, and I think most of us are decent at it, but we can be better. I want you to be skeptical. I want you to start asking questions. Who is benefiting or profiting from a specific belief or position? That's a question we asked in our topic selection worksheet. I want you to consider assumptions that are being made. Sorry, I have to correct this. I was typing the second one and then I thought, okay, consider the assumptions that are being made about you or the audience, whoever that audience are. So what is this thing saying about you? And then consider the assumptions you are being asked to make, to either hold a point of view, to believe in such a product, things like that. So we'll see how this works in just a little bit. Popular claims that we had were things like the drinking age, cigarette age. I'll combine those. Assumptions about gender and sex roles, who does what, right? Or colors, or what is manly and femaly. No, it's not a word. Feminine, and popularity of products or services, and video game violence. So these are all good things for you to look at. When we look at these claims and also these other major topics, many of the claims that we analyze are based on false assumptions, and a lot of you didn't see that, and that's okay because you haven't been trained to really look at those things. And so in the discussion board responses, I did point out some of the issues with these assumptions. When I talk about a false assumption, it's something that seems right from a limited perspective, but when challenged, those assumptions will crumble. We can call false assumptions fallacies, and maybe you've heard that term before. If you haven't, that is okay, because we will be reading about fallacies in a couple weeks, but I do want to kind of give you a little bit of a primer or a little bit of pre-understanding about them, because I think you know what a fallacy is, even if you haven't really been introduced to them. So a fallacy, I'll just say it's a leap in judgment or evaluation based on either incomplete information or problematic assumptions. Lots of times there's generalized language that doesn't account for individuals or nuance. So it's a lot of things like, all this group, it does these things. So it relies on stereotypes or even selective information. It might paint one group as this crazy opposition, and we're the rational thinkers, right? Logical fallacies are rooted in the logical syllogism, which is a whole nother course entirely, but that's all right. One of the older logical syllogisms is, all men are mortal. Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. So you're taking the first assumption, we call it a claim, and the second assumption, and putting it together. I'm sorry, just skipped ahead. And coming up with a conclusion. It's verbal math. These first two assumptions need to be true in order for the conclusion to be true. Now, there are lots of different variations. You're going to have, it's always true, it's sometimes true, it's never true, all sorts of things. And it gets very convoluted, but we'll just keep it like this. So we can take a bad example. All dogs have 4 legs and fur. The cat, or this cat, has 4 legs and fur. Therefore, this cat is a dog. That doesn't work, right? Because we're defining something based on characteristics that exist inexclusive, so they're not exclusive to dogs, right? And that becomes problematic. Now, other things are mortal, but what this does is it takes Socrates, making Socrates mortal, right? This takes a cat and makes it a dog, and that's just not only is it are these true, but it makes for a untrue conclusion. So when we look at true, well, there are hairless dogs and hairless cats, and not all dogs have 4 legs because some have accidents and get a leg chopped off, right? So there's things that create exceptions, and we have to start asking what is true and what is not true. When we look at fallacies, the leading fallacies that we had were things like false analogy or a false comparison. When we looked at the drinking or smoking age and serving in the military or being an adult. A false cause, that video games will cause violence, or this is causing that. False consensus or bandwagoning. So that's correct. Everyone else thinks this way, so we should too, or everyone else is doing this thing, so we should also. Everyone's doing it, Mom. Well, if everyone would jump off a bridge, would you? Right, so that's trying to cut through that false consensus or the bandwagon. And then stereotype, or what's often called hasty generalization. And then there's the no true Scotsman. That's a separate one from stereotype, but it'd be men do this. Girls, why did I say girls? I should say women. That's not very polite. Sorry. Women do Y. Only a real man or a woman is this way, right? So you might see this, only true Browns fans believe this, or Bengals fans, or whomever, right? So we see this kind of moving the goalposts to create an exclusive group. So the problem with fallacies is that we substitute this idea of absolutes for reality, which is everything is not black and white, and there's actually a fallacy about that, black and white, or either or fallacy. And instead of looking at this reality of nuance, that there's many, many different stances. They indicate bias, right? If someone is using a fallacy, it means they don't want to look at the reality of a situation or the reality of an argument or acknowledge weaknesses. Instead, they might attack you and your beliefs instead of answering a question. They might deflect, right? So that indicates the argument's weak and stifles further explanation or investigation into that topic, right? So if someone is just throwing fallacies at you, you can't move on. And so that limits the discussion and our knowledge. So let's look at an example. Drinking age. We know inherently that it seems wrong that you have to be 21 to drink, but can be 18 to fight and die for the country, right? And everyone always puts in die for our freedoms as part of their assertion that this 3-year gap is just wrong. So while it might be wrong, the explanation for it, we have to find something that's convincing. Fallacies will capitalize on the sense of wrongness and doesn't allow us to evaluate or explain why is the drinking age 21. Well, historically, it's 21 because a group of people convinced Congress and the president in 1984 to raise the drinking age in order to lower the number of fatalities and accidents among 18 to 21-year-old drivers. So it was a driving issue, not a drinking or responsibility issue. And that's the main reason. But because it's been so long, we forget the actual cause. Instead, we focus on other things. But what we create is a false analogy or a false comparison. Drinking and fighting or dying for the country have nothing to do with one another. Now, while age is this common factor, it doesn't seem to work other ways, right? We might say, well, you can vote and you used to be able to buy cigarettes when you're 18 and win the lottery, take on student debt, all sorts of stuff. Why can't you drink? That was fine, but no one's arguing for other things like, well, you're adult when you're 18, you should be able to be held off driving until you're 18. No one's saying that. And no one else also saying, well, considering that you can drive when you're 16, you can also, fight and die for the country at 16. No one's arguing for that, at least that I know of. I'm sure there's people that do. There are times where people do enter the military service early. But, why is it this arbitrary 18, 21, things like that? And we have a lot of problems. One problem lies in this perceived injustice of demanding a responsibility service. A lot of people say you can be drafted. Well, there is no draft anymore, so it's a voluntary service, while withholding this privilege of drinking. We could probably rephrase it, and that's part of the problem. Is we might rephrase it. We consider people responsible enough to defend the country and handle deadly weapons, but not responsible enough to drink at age 18. Well, that's good. But then there's other problems. Well, people are trained. They go through basic training when they join the military. No one is trained to drink, right? They get that all, that's the responsibility of the parents, right? Or the schools or whatever, right? So they're not alike situations in any way. We could probably compare it better, joining the military and driving, right? Because you're trained, you go through driver's ed classes, you should go through, that means you're ready for the military. I don't know. But the idea is that drinking and serving in the military have nothing to do with each other, but they seem like they do because they're linked by an age. No one's saying, well, most car companies won't rent to you until you're 25. You can't rent a hotel room in Vegas until you're 21. That's not fair. What if I was in the military? I'm responsible enough to drive a tank, but I can't rent a car from Hertz, right? That is an injustice as well, but they're different things. So we'll move on. We're going to learn more about fallacies because really breaking down arguments and evaluating things is part of this entire course, and it takes a long time. But fallacies are going to give us blind spots in our reasoning, and it happens to all of us. Adults and educated adults and all sorts of stuff. I won't say love, but yeah, we love fallacies because they make things easier. But we need to learn to see around them and be careful about them when we select our topics. When you start discussing your topics, I want you to look for absolute thinking, this idea of all or none, right? So that's part of the reason why I ban these specific topics is they encourage this fallacious all or none thinking, particularly when many of you are talking about, I wish I could choose a drinking age or abortion or gun issues, because many of those things revolve around this all or none thinking, where all people who do this are bad and all people who do Y are good, and therefore all people who do this should go to jail or whatever. Because that's how the debate plays out in the public sphere, right? This call for moderation of, we should allow some instances of X, but when it gets up to Y, we should disallow it, right? Well, how do we manage that then? So it becomes very interesting, and I hope that makes sense. Anyway, so I want you to be open to your topics. Don't pick something based on your absolutist reasoning. If you have a strong reaction to things, that's good, but you do want to start looking at them a little bit more. Start paying attention to your 2 or 3 selected topics and realize that you can change and you can add new topics. Let me put that right there. So you can change over these next couple of weeks. The last thing I'll leave you with is this idea is called the red car effect. The basic idea is the more you pay attention to something, the more you'll see it. The idea being that you might buy a red car of a specific brand because, this is original, no one sees me, right? So, or no, I don't see it anywhere. And so you buy this car, and the moment you're in the car and you're driving down the road, you start noticing how many other red cars there are. And you might notice this when you get a new car. Wait a minute, I never noticed so many of these cars on the road before. It's not that they weren't there, it's just that you didn't pay attention. So the more you start paying attention to your 2 or 3 topic choices, the more you'll hear about them and the more you will learn about them. So that's what makes this interesting. And I can't guarantee it'll happen, but I'll almost guarantee that this will happen. The more you start looking and listening for your topics, the more you're going to see it. So that's just a really brief thing about claims, warrants, and your topic choices. I hope it's helpful, and I will leave it there. Let me know if you have questions. Thank you.